Are men more or less manlier in movies today? It's an interesting question because I'm a guy who loves the action movies of the 80s, but things are a little bit different to what we have nowadays. Back then, you basically had three pillars of the manliest men in cinema: Schwarzenegger, Stallone, and Willis.
Welcome to the party, pal!
And you know what? I'm going to throw in Snipes in there as well, because how can I not? He's the fourth on this Mount Rushmore of great men of action. And altogether, these were the GOATs, and some may argue are still the GOATs of the action movie genre. But when I look towards those that could fill in those shoes nowadays, I believe there's really only one other individual who I genuinely say could do that. Because if you wanted to argue either John Cena or The Rock or maybe even Jason Momoa, I'm sorry, neither do their movies live up to that same consistent quality of entertainment, nor do they actually come across as your genuinely hard-knuckled great fighters and iconic men of the screen with roles or characters that have become synonymous with them as actors. Schwarzenegger has literally become the Terminator in folklore. Stallone is both Rambo and Rocky, and The Rock is just, well, The Rock. I couldn't even name a character he's actually played apart from maybe Black Adam. Though I also suppose John Cena is now Peacekeeper and Momoa is Aquaman. But it's funny how they're all superheroes which feel like characters more related to an existing IP rather than something original. Hopefully you get the point, and perhaps those are ideas for another video in the future. But what about other men or the male characters landscape in cinema today? Let's backtrack a bit and define what being manly actually means.
I'm a man who discovered the wheel and built the Eiffel Tower out of metal and brawn. That's what kind of man I am.
Just from the 80s alone, male action superstars were basically just tough men. Big dudes with big muscle and big epic movie lines. They were guys who, more often than not, were the hero of the story, breaking necks and cashing checks. But that also wasn't to say that none of them showed any emotion, and in fact, I still think some of these hugely successful movies as being filled with emotion and drama. Rambo is basically a PTSD educational video in disguise, and even the Terminator has some heart to it. Hell, even the first Die Hard has moments of emotions being shared and characters revealing something hard for them from their core.
She never heard me say I'm sorry. And I want you to tell her that, Al. I want you to tell her that John said that he was sorry. Okay?
So to say these men didn't share their feelings back in the day, I don't think is necessarily true. But I do feel like the emphasis on this aspect has greatly increased to what we have today. Men in films feel like they are both encouraged and supported even more so to showcase their vulnerabilities and to express their emotions in different situations. I think one of the potentially biggest changes is that you feel like men that you see on screen today are a lot more compassionate than, say, of the 80s. Or rather, it only feels like that because we're highlighting more moments of them expressing compassion rather than just killing people. But I don't know, it's hard to say exactly what's what nowadays compared to back then because, well, there's just so much content out there, and while in some movies or shows male characters could act a little bit less manly, in others they're still doing a lot of the same thing as in the past. But for the sake of this argument, let's briefly compare 5 of the biggest action films from the last 10 years with a leading male versus the iconic films of Schwarzenegger, Stallone, and the Willis era. In no particular order, these would most likely be John Wick, Top Gun Maverick, Mission Impossible, Extraction, and No Time to Die. Personally, these films all feature top heavyweight A-listers, and some of them even have that same iconic role synonymous with their name. For instance, Keanu Reeves is John Wick. Daniel Craig is James Bond.
Am I going to have a problem with you, Bond?
No, don't worry. You're not my type.
Smart.
Single.
But what these films all have in common to me is that, well, they're more so portraying men who are clever, reserved, resourceful, intelligent, and who are usually great with a gun. Whereas to me, the movies of Schwarzenegger, Stallone, and Willis seem to be a lot more about portraying men who are heroic, brave, of great body build and stature, smart, and great with their hands. Yes, they're also resourceful, but in a different way, perhaps more primal. And yes, they're also great with guns, but it wasn't always their first go-to.
Stick around.
In other words, how technology has evolved from analog to digital, it kind of feels like that with men today. While before it may have felt more raw and bare bones, things now feel more polished and refined. But are they more or less emotional? Maybe. Or maybe it's kind of the same, just in different situations. Instead of showing us vulnerability as a victim of war, now it might be more about vulnerability being a victim of espionage. From going on a rampage to bring back a child, it can now become more about revenge for a puppy. Whether men have changed greatly in cinema over time, or whether they've become more or less manly, is up to your own way of how you want to see it, and what your own definition of manliness really is. But I do believe there are still some glaring noticeable changes that are present, especially when you think about who are the male action superstars of this genre today, and from how strongly they are associated with their different characters. But I do feel like apart from being more raw and less polished than what we have today, there is also one other element that makes Schwarzenegger, Stallone, and Willis stand out compared to everything else today as men of the big screen, and that is they were all memorable.
What killed the dinosaurs? The Ice Age! Frosty!
Mac.
And so I said, I think you should make a movie called The Librarian. You know? And then Jason Statham comes up and goes, I told you guys to be quiet. And you're still fucking talking.